and welcome to Herp A Derp, a podcast about breaking the stigma on herpes and empowering the community. I'm your host, Erin DeVos. As always, you can review my episodes on YouTube, Anchor, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find the link to the channel on the podcast's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter page at Herp A Derp Podcast. Thanks! Hey, Herp A Derpers! Thank you for all the love around Valentine's Day. Whether it was through Instagram or sharing the herpes Valentines, I felt really loved and connected in some ways this year because I wanted to take a moment to share how special that was for me, of how raw and real I was about my feelings around herpes and Valentine's Day, and that it's always hard for your first Valentine's Day getting the diagnosis and feeling those feelings, but no, it doesn't have to be as tough as it seems, and that we only build how much stronger, basically get stronger every year from that, and knowing that how much we really truly love ourselves. So just wanted to take a moment to thank you for that. And so now let's dive into this week's episode. And this week I want to get technical with you. I want to get academic with you about breaking down the meaning, creation, the communication of stigma. And we know that stigmas are profoundly negative stereotypes of a social group and its members that have diffused and normalized throughout a community. Yes, I'm going to get this real with you. And Herp A Derp's mission is about creating a stigma-free community, and yet outside forces make us all who have herpes as a marked and as a stigmatized group. And it does so much more than that, right? Like, stigmas denote people as discredited, devalued, and disgraced. Stigmas around health, especially sexual health, and risk communication are considered the leading, yet misunderstood, barrier of health awareness. While much has been uncovered about the stigma, health, and risk, there are still many questions that remain with stigma and surrounding its creation. And so 2 questions that I have are, how can we or have someone design messages that effectively alert people the looming questions around sexual health and herpes and STIs successfully, promoting desirable behavioral changes without surrounding ideas around the stigma around that, right? And how can we create an effective, reliable means to eliminate an existing stigma? Now, all big things and big dreams with these types of questions, but it's deep thoughts that really make us think, like, why is a stigma a stigma? Like, what really defines the stigma's purpose? And so that's has been always a question of mine, of just kind of in the episode why, how I had talked about, my episode why is about why, there's no cure for herpes, but why is there even a stigma around herpes? And I really wanted to investigate and get this and break it down for us. So, here we go. Stigma is the Greek word meaning mark, cut, or burn into the skin, that it has been used to identify criminal slaves as polluted and being shunned in the public. Talk about unfair, right? And however, in a simpler term, stigma is classified as being represented for persons who are usually excluded from society due to a condition they themselves did not choose or over which they have little control over, like herpes, for example. In sociology, stigma is described as an attribute, behavioral, or reputation which is socially slurring in a particular way. And as the famous sociologist Guffman puts it, it is a vital social identity that relates to the way we represent ourselves. Whoa, right? Like, stigma is defined in so many socially discriminatory ways. And one common claim in stigma theories is that the public becomes socialized to recognize stigmatized people and chooses to weaken them. Theoretically, stigmas should only be created when power gaps are imaginable. Beyond stating the boundary condition, little attention has been paid to as why some messages, such as media stories and movies and interpersonal rumors, provoke stigma-related outcomes, while others do not. Weird, isn't it? Like, stigma communication needs to include content that quickly gains attention, encourages grouping and stereotyping, and provides emotional and cognitive motivations to engage in devaluation and discrimination. So, for stigmas to stick, the type of communication includes 4 types of content, as we know as marks, labels, peril, and etiology. Now, I could have totally butchered that last one as etiology, but for those of you who do not know etiology means, Google says that the investigation or attribution of the cause for reason for something. Powerful, isn't it? The cause or reason for something. That something is what really sticks out to me the most. And what really also brings it together is that social communication and stigma are powerfully connected. Having this way of two-way communication that is interpersonal when you're trying to create beneficial relationships. Communication is critical to a stigma's existence, to elimination. And stigma has also shaped communication by finding others with the same personal characteristics in the networked communities. Perhaps the strangest thing about the existing herpes stigma is that the stigma originated from what is and was a very effective Big Pharma marketing campaign. In a recent article that I read called How Big Pharma Helped Create Herpes Stigma to Sell Drugs by Salon Magazine, it suggested that the pharmaceutical industry is somewhat responsible for slandering people with herpes in order to sell antiviral medication, and mentioned this notion in various think pieces over the years. So what I mean by think pieces is there's articles, which I'm about to dive into. And so the company that started this campaign, Burroughs Wellcome Co., is now known as the GlaxoSmithKline PLC, created an advertising campaign around to raise concerns about genital herpes to promote its first-of-a-kind treatment, Sorvariax. Again, I don't know why my pronunciation is off today, so that's how I'm going to pronounce it. But in this 1986 article, in the Sun Sentinel newspaper, noted how the advertisements for the prescription drug company were unusual for the industry at this time. Imagine the air quotes around unusual. So, The Zorviak's campaign included full-page ads which ran in national magazines such as Playboy, but did not specifically name the medicine, but rather inform readers that herpes is treatable. And a quote, "The intent is to encourage people with herpes to visit their physician," end quote. And that was from Kathy Bartlett, who was the spokeswoman in 1986, speaking on behalf of the campaign. Now, Janelle Marie Pierce, who is the founder of HANDS, Herpes Activist Networking to Dismantle Stigma, had told Salon in this article that Big Pharma was an identified player in elevating the stigma around genital herpes. But they also weren't the only culprits. Today, we know genital herpes is often mocked and joked about despite being relatively common in the United States. We know 1 in 6 people have some form of herpes. And herpes had gotten a lot of attention in the 70s and 80s, and it was viewed as the Scarlet Letter. And this is referring to the Time magazine cover story titled "The New Scarlet Letter." Wow. Letter is what I mean, in 1982. I had also tweeted the picture of the cover a few posts ago on Herp A Derp's Twitter, if you want to check that out. I'll also post it in the show notes. This happened a little before the HIV epidemic. Wow. Epidemic. Thanks to the activism surrounding HIV, society became more comfortable talking about sex, sexuality, and prevention, and certainly marginalized groups were able to find a voice and be accepted and more mainstream. We all know that a herpes diagnosis can be devastating mentally and emotionally because of the shame around the stigma. And at times, the stigma is worse than the diagnosis itself and can lead to a wide range of emotional roller coasters. And I hope you all know what I mean by that. So, after all that talk and history of what stigma really means and how it became stigmatized in the United States, how is the best way to approach the stigma? My answer is educate. Educate each other and empower people to make the choices that are best for themselves and in the surrounding community. To not, call out people for those herpes jokes. Call out people for not noticing or really understanding what it means to have herpes or any other STIs for that matter. By understanding, accepting, and lowering the risk of misunderstanding between intimate partners, we can become more understanding when we become more mindful and respect everyone around us. Educate and promote sexually healthy lifestyles, whether you are a sex educator, therapist, or professional who is trying to navigate how to give the news of a herpes diagnosis and wanting to help these people navigate those health challenges responsibly and shame-free. Be the change you want to see the world, my fellow Herp A Derpers. The stigma may have come from a place of finding ways to spread awareness, but could have been handled in a much better way without creating a social stigma around treating STDs and STIs. So, are you shocked how the herpes stigma came to be? As always, feel free to share or comment on this podcast episode through YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or email at herpaderpodcast@gmail.com. Anchor listeners can now leave voicemail messages after listening to the podcast episode to get those deep reflections. It's super fun to do and share your thoughts.